Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. I'm very glad to have on the show today Kevin Freeman. Kevin is one of the world's leading experts on the issues of economic warfare and financial terrorism. He has consulted for and briefed members of both the U.S. House and Senate, present and past CIA, DIA, FBI, SEC, Homeland Security, the Justice Department, as well as local and state law enforcement. His research has been presented in critical DoD studies on economic warfare, Iran, and weapons of mass destruction presented to the Secretary of Defense and the Undersecretary of Defense Intelligence. Kevin is co-founder of the National Security Investment Consultant Institute, a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy, and a member of the advisory board of First Liberty Institute. Kevin, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Kyle. Good to be with you.
You are the money man. Do people call you the money man because you know a whole lot about money? How it affects us, how it works, how it moves, how it keeps us safe, how it puts us in danger. You're just the money guy. It's pretty remarkable. And that resume is kind of one for the record books. You're one smart fellow.
Well, you're very kind. Money is important. It's not the only important thing, but it's important, and you can control people with money. We see it every day, whether through our jobs or whatever. Money is what talks, and it's what controls a lot of people.
That is the truth. Absolutely. Now, your organization and your show really is called Economic War Room. Tell us a little bit about that, how this all came about, how it got started, and maybe some about the work that you do there.
Sure, Kyle. Well, I started in 2008, really, in economic warfare, and nobody had even heard of that since, 40 years before that, I think, was before the last time anybody really thought about economic warfare. Bottom line is that if you want to destroy America, all you have to do is destroy our economy, take down our stock market or whatever. And so I went to the Pentagon in 2008 and said, hey, look, our nation's vulnerable. We had a financial crisis and a crash. The stock market was collapsing. There was a housing bubble. And I said, this is a great way to destroy America. Let me research it, which they did. And I found evidence that out of Russia, Vladimir Putin, out of the Middle East, two sovereign wealth funds, and certainly some elements in China had decided, wait, we're going to take America down. Because what sets us apart? How does 4% of the world's population control 25% of the world's economy? What makes America a superpower? Is it our military? It's the large army? Is it the Navy? Is it the nuclear weapons? Well, actually, we're not dominant in any of those. What makes us dominant has been our financial system and the fact that that we have the money control of most of the world.
Wow. What an incredible time to be looking into this kind of concept of economic warfare. 2008 was really a surprise to a lot of Americans and what happened during that time of struggle financially, the crash. Did you see any of that coming? Were you one of those people were you forecasting any of that happening, or did it happen and then you kind of took the ball and ran with it there in your research and your work?
Yeah, well, just to level set, in 2008, I had two young daughters, and we were homeschooling and raising them. And the market started to go down in the summer. We had the banks started to fail, like we saw not too long ago, a repeat. But on a Friday, you'd go home from work and you'd spend the weekend, and on Monday morning, you'd see that the name of your bank had changed. And so early in the 2008 process, before the big crash, a gentleman I used to work with, who at the time was like the chief investment officer of Wells Fargo, and I were talking back and forth. And he and I decided this looks like something is happening outside of the normal system. I began to research it, and I approached actually a congresswoman at the time who sat on the House Financial Services Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, and this would be in the summer of 2008. And I said, there's something wrong. There is an attack on our stock market, and I believe, that it's intended to take down the economy right before the election. And it was John McCain versus Barack Obama. That's how long ago this was. John McCain and Barack Obama. And bottom line is it crashed our stock market. I warned about it. I wrote about it. The Pentagon picked up my warnings after the fact, and then they hired me to come in and explain how that was a new form of warfare. Controlling money is a form of warfare.
I'm just blown away that you were the guy that saw this coming. I sure hope everyone's still listening to you. I'm sure they're listening to you much more closely now and what you have to say. I want to jump into talking about our economy right now. We're hearing a lot about Bidenomics, and the current presidential administration keeps telling us that everything's fine. I think that maybe we're in that same kind of a position. I hope we're not in that same kind of position where we were just before the crash of 2008. But we have a presidential administration who keeps telling the people over and over, Bidenomics is working, everything's okay. If you're feeling the pinch at home or at the grocery store, at the gas station, maybe that's not really what's going on. Maybe it's just you. What do you think about what is happening currently with the American economy based on your very intelligent and wise and forecasting experience that you've had with this before?
Well, I can tell you everything is not fine. We have a debt bubble that is unbelievable. We have $35 trillion in reported federal debt. That's up almost $3 trillion from a year ago. I wrote this book, Pirate Money, that you see here, back in June of last year. And on June 24th, that date, the average household debt, the debt that the federal government held that was attributed by individual, actually not even at the household level, by citizen, if they collected and said we're going to pay off the debt, they'd had to have collected like $95,000 worth of from every single person in America to pay that debt. It's now almost $4,000 debt per citizen. In other words, the government has borrowed and spent $9,000 per person in this past year to keep this economy afloat. Now, is it floating well? No. People are hurting. They're seeing their price. You go to a restaurant, a hamburger that was $5 is now $8. You go to the gas pump. You go wherever you go. It's so much more expensive than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Families are hurting. Salaries haven't gone up this much. Just imagine, let's say you made $2,000 a month or $3,000 or $5,000, but let's say $2,000 a month 4 years ago. That $2,000 a month, if you spent everything you made and just barely broke even and had nothing left over from savings, you would be now spending about $2,500 a month. Has your salary gone up that much? I don't think so. So no, the economy's not fine. They say the job market looks fantastic. We've never employed so many people. Well, that's because we've had people streaming across the border, and they've been taking the majority of those jobs and the majority of the income increases. This is a weak economy, not a strong economy. People know it, they feel it in their bones, and they're producing these fake economic statistics to say everything's okay. So if inflation went up 20% and then it stayed flat for a few months, they'd say, hey, look, there's no inflation. No, not true. We're still feeling the pain of higher prices.
I think everybody is absolutely feeling that, Kevin. And it's almost unconscionable that a sitting president and his administration would be manipulating statistics or cherry picking statistics to show to the American people and continue to tell us that everything's fine. I hate to think the worst, that this is merely a ploy for votes in a presidential election year, because this is so harmful to citizens and to families going forward. It feels like putting the world's tiniest patch on a dam with a million different cracks in it. This thing's just ready to blow. What is the after effect here? If we keep just putting these little teeny tiny Band-Aids and little teeny tiny patches and saying everything's fine, it's okay, but no real solutions are coming from a current administration, how does this make us vulnerable as a nation, but also how are American families vulnerable going forward?
Well, let me start. every political administration will claim that the economy is better than it is. That's just normal. That's what politicians do. So whether it's my favorite politician, President Reagan would always tout the best statistics and say the economy is good. But you can feel in your daily lives, in your checkbook, in your bones, if the economy is good or bad. And people don't feel that the economy is good right now. What are the implications? Well, I just mentioned one. We have $35 trillion of reported federal debt. If they had to collect it from every man, woman, and child that is a citizen of this great country, they would have to take $104,000 or $5,000 from each of us to pay that debt off. And that debt is growing at an exponential rate. So where does that leave us? How does the government borrow all that money? Well, here's the answer. We are the reserve currency of the world. The U.S. dollar is the thing that anybody anywhere in the world wants to have if they're going to keep reserves. If you got extra money, what form of currency do you want it in? Well, for the past, I guess, since the 1940s, you wanted to hold that in U.S. dollars. If you wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you would have to convert your currency to U.S. dollars to buy oil. If you wanted to buy goods from China, you would have to convert your currency to U.S. dollars and pay the Chinese in dollars. That is no longer the case, and it's becoming less the case every single day. And what happens if you have that much debt and you're not the reserve currency? Well, nobody bothers to borrow the U.S. Treasury bonds. They don't bother to invest in the dollar. And that means that you're putting out $35 trillion in debt. Nobody wants to buy it. Well, there's only two remaining. If the foreign nations aren't buying your debt, there are only two places you can sell it. You can sell it to the Federal Reserve, or you can sell it to the American people, either one of which is going to be troublesome. That's what like Venezuela. Venezuela's currency collapsed. They were producing too much debt and they were spending too much money. And now, is Venezuela's currency worth anything? No, it lines the streets as garbage. What happens if the U.S. dollar collapses like that? And that's what we're facing. One day, Hemingway was asked, how does one go broke? And his answer was very slowly, then all at once. And that's what America is facing. Very slowly, we've seen our economy deteriorating. Then all at once, it's going to go off a cliff if we don't do something.
Well, that's terrifying. Thank you. It's really scary because we are seeing it happen in other nations. And there are people in our country saying, hey, look at Venezuela. Look what happened. Don't be Venezuela. And we still feel like maybe we aren't turning this train around, where the freight train is still chugging along the tracks. So you say that's where we're headed if something doesn't happen or something doesn't change. Tell us what needs to happen. What's the game plan here that gets the U.S. dollar stabilized and in a better position? And what's the way forward here, sitting on a mountain of $35 trillion in debt? What do we do?
All right, so let me give you an example. This is a Zimbabwe $20 or $100 Zimbabwe note from 2008 that was worth $20 in American currency. Actually, that was 1995, worth $20 in American currency. But in 2008, they were having to produce $100 trillion notes that weren't worth one penny. So it went in 1995 from a $100 note that was the equivalent of a $20 bill to 2008, a $100 trillion note that wasn't the equivalent of one penny. That is what happens when a currency fails. And it doesn't happen just in Zimbabwe. It's happened here in Venezuela, where I've got a $500 million bolivar, or it's happened in Weimar, Germany, where I've got an 1 million mark from the 1920s that my grandmother left me. It says 1 million mark. You think a German mark, a 1 million German mark would be worth something? It was worth less, worth nothing. So that's what happens when a currency collapses. How do you fix it? It's a very simple answer. You grow. You grow your economy. You take the shackles off the American people. I saw a study by Reason magazine. Now, my father was born in 1935, so he started work in actually about 1950 was when he first went to work. We had a certain level of regulations in our government. Regulations are things like, are you allowed to have chickens at your house and produce eggs. Well, a lot of states, a lot of cities, no, you can't have any livestock at your house. Or are you allowed to garden in your front yard? Are you allowed to use this or do this? If we had regulations the same level as we had when my father started work, the average American would be taking home not $50,000 a year, but $330,000 a year. That's how much regulations cost us, because they prevent kids from learning to be entrepreneurs. So you can't have lemonade stands in your front yard. And yes, those are regulations in cities. You can't have lemonade stands, but the regulations get extreme. Now, I'm all in favor of clean air and clean water, and I want more regulation than we had in 1950, but maybe not as much as we have today. So one of the answers, and it's a political answer, is do you want more regulations or less regulations? Because I think you can do this, you can't do that. They begin to intrude in our basic lives and our basic economics. If you just lowered the level of regulations, allowed our economy to grow at 3% rather than 1.5% as it's been growing, that debt won't be a problem. We'll pay it off. We'll get out of debt in a very few short years. So one of the things we could do politically is reduce regulations and encourage people to start business, try things, do things. But instead, our government gets together, and I think the government feels a need. Every time we gather together, we've got to find out more ways to tell people how to live, what to do, what they can do or can't do. And our federal government just continues to add regulations to the pile. The only time they went down in my lifetime that I recall was during the Trump administration, where he wanted to throw out one regulation for every new regulation that was created. And at one point, he threw out 8 regulations, and they're dumb things. They're like controlling buggy whip manufacturing. We don't manufacture a lot of buggy whips these days, or telling horses where they can travel and so forth. We need to clean up our regulatory structure and make it possible for people to be entrepreneurial, start businesses, invest in one another, like crowdfunding. What a great idea. Somebody wants to start a company and you can crowdfund and invest in them. But did you know that the average person cannot make an investment in themselves under the securities laws unless they're an accredited investor? So other rich people can invest in private companies. I'll give you a really perfect example.
I want to understand this better.
Okay. Uber. Have you ever ridden in an Uber?
I certainly have, but I don't do it alone.
Yeah, but do you like it better than a taxi?
I do.
I like it better than a taxi.
Yeah.
With an Uber, I can pick up, there's an app on my phone, and I can go on Uber, and I can say, I want to go from this place to this place, and they'll tell me exactly how much it'll cost in advance. They'll give me the driver's name. I get to rate them and tip them. And if I left something behind, I've got a phone number I can call and say, I want to get back what I left in your cab. I know when they're going to arrive. I know when I'm going to be dropped off. And I can share that with my family so they can know where I'm going. In every respect, it's a better deal. Now, in New York City, it used to be if you wanted to drive a taxi, you'd have to pay $1 million medallion to buy from the city, and you'd have $1 million that you'd pay the city for permission to drive a cab. With Uber, you just have to have a car, you have to pass safety tests, and you have to get out there and drive. So I think it's better. When the idea was first brought to the American people, the only people allowed to invest in the idea were great big hedge funds and wealthy people, and you couldn't make an investment in it. And so by the time it went public and you could buy shares of Uber on the stock exchange, all the cream was gone. And if you bought shares when it first came out and held them for the next several years, you lost money. Well, the people who came up with the idea made a lot of money, but the people who actually wanted to invest in it when the average person could. So it was left to accredited investors, multimillionaires, because regulations prevented you from investing it. Here's another one, Uber, same example. In California, they don't want you to be your own independent businessman and drive an Uber. They want you to be an employee of Uber so that you can't control your own destiny. You're an employee. You have to show up for work at a certain time. You have to do what the boss says. So they're discouraging you having the opportunity to go out on your own and strike and own your own business, and encouraging you to go work for some big nameless, faceless corporation. And the only hope that you have of getting out of that is if you save up enough money, which is very hard to do these days. So bottom line, regulations have prevented us from growing our economy as rapidly as we could, and they've certainly kept the average person from being able to invest in. I mean, when I was a kid, I could buy shares in Microsoft, and Bill Gates made a fortune, bought shares in Apple, made a fortune. These days, you don't see great companies like that coming public. They're reserved for the wealthy only until all the cream is gone, and then you get to invest. That's why regulation, one of the ways regulation prevents people from getting wealthy, from building up opportunity and growing our economy.
To what end? Let me ask you this question. What is the point? I mean, it seems like everything that you're explaining, getting rid of unnecessary regulation, helping people start small businesses, you said take the shackles off. Really, it's like, to what end do you think the government wants to stifle the economy in this way? I mean, heaven forbid you're from a state like California. I mean, this is so backwards, right? It's so difficult to own a business or even big business in California. It's so difficult to have employees. They've made it nearly impossible. They keep raising the minimum wage, which sounds good in theory, but in practice, we're seeing small business after small business shut down. Chains, the businesses that have been around for decades are closing. They just can't do it. We're so overburdened by taxes. It seems so simple when you say it to just kind of release people to go do what Americans are so good at doing, which is create, be entrepreneurial, invest, grow, build, leave legacy. Why are certain people in leadership and politically trying to stifle the economy in this way? To what end? What does it benefit them?
Okay, well, let's start with what it used to be in California. There was a lady, she's in her 90s. She said, I want to open an Arby's restaurant in Los Angeles and Hollywood, I think it was. She opened an Arby's restaurant. She's in her 90s now, and it was profitable for 40 years. And then they raised the minimum wage to $20 an hour. And she said, I can no longer continue to operate this restaurant because an Arby's sandwich would be so expensive, nobody would stop to buy one. So they closed their doors. And this lady in their 90s said, so that's why people are leaving California. That's why they're fleeing to Texas and Florida and other states that have less regulation, more economic opportunity. To what end? Well, one end is I want votes. And so Gavin Newsom says, I want you to vote for me. I'm going to make sure you make at least $20 an hour because that's only fair, knowing full well that it's going to cause costs to go up. And so you won't be able to live on $20 an hour. And so you'll want 25. And then when costs go up further, you'll need 30 or 50 or $100 an hour. So part of it is pandering to buy votes. Part of it is control. And we want the elite to control, and we elite get together. You wonder why Bill Gates hangs out with George Soros and people like that. I think it's control, and they create these mechanisms of control. Everybody's got to take a COVID vaccine or you'll lose your job. Everybody has to work for a big company. We don't want people, so we'll leave during COVID, we'll leave big box retailers open, but we'll close mom and pop stores because we want to push them into the big companies that we control. And then part of it is just absolute ignorance where we want safety. I recall a Simpsons episode, and there are a lot of Simpsons episodes out there, but one of them was Homer decided he wanted a stop sign for safety reasons in his neighborhood. And so he became known as the safety guy. You called me the money guy. Homer Simpson was the safety guy. So he put up a stop sign. And then he realized that, maybe people spill hot coffee. So he stopped hot coffee. And then he went to the nuclear power plant and he demanded that they put in new safety rules, some of which were very good, but pretty soon everybody had to wear knee pads if they were roller skating. They had to, so much regulation and control that economic activity stopped. And then finally, Montgomery Burns, the owner of the nuclear power plant, hires Homer to come in to be the head of safety at the power plant. And he did it just to buy him off and get him out of the way. And he did. And pretty soon, everything went back to normal. But the bottom line of it is sometimes we fall for it because we want to be safe. And so we've got to have safety, and we'll take on so many things for safety that we give up our liberties. And when we give up our liberties, we give up our potential for economic growth. And that's the real risk of politicians, is they'll promise us safety, and what they really want is control.
Oh, it's so true. That was a great analogy, and really brings me to the next question so nicely that I want to ask you about. I'm glad you're bringing up safety. And as we approach a presidential election, a really, really critical one here, as we have mostly two options for president of the United States. And we know that this trickles down all the way down ballot throughout an administration to so many appointments. The Supreme Court is affected. I mean, who we put in the White House in this next cycle is just extremely critical. And the economy is everyone's biggest concern. Now, we can talk about, these other issues that people feel very passionately about, but to your point in the beginning of this show, money matters, and it matters to people, and it's something that we're, whether you think that this is a good thing or a bad thing, or you don't have an opinion on it, we're dependent on it, and dependent on it to make us feel safe. So there's this narrative coming out now, and a lot of our younger generations are hearing language and hearing people say that capitalism is bad. Capitalism is evil. It's unfair. It only benefits the ultra wealthy. And we should be looking at forms of government like socialism, or look to some of these other nations who try to make a more equitable environment for their citizens. I would love your take on this and what you would say to someone who would step right up to you, Mr. Freeman, and say, capitalism is the devil. What say you?
Well, number one, the capitalism that they think we're experiencing is not free market capitalism. It is crony capitalism, and that is entirely different. It's oligarchical. It's very similar to what Mussolini had in the fascist days of Italy. But I'll draw a severe contrast. Here's your choice. You can be Hong Kong pre-1999, and I visited Hong Kong in 1999, which was under British rule. It was one of the freest places on earth, and people had freedom to express themselves. They had freedom to live as they wanted to, and they had a rapidly growing economy, just phenomenal place. Or you can be in Hong Kong today under complete communist control and rule. Now, there was an individual in Hong Kong just a couple of weeks ago. There were three of them who decided that they would turn their backs on the national anthem at a sporting event, right? So in America, if you don't like the national anthem, you kneel, right? And there have been people who've kneeled during the national anthem. We can say, well, you're not patriotic and you ought to stand up. The owner of the football team might say, stand up. I want you to stand up and show your respect for the flag. But bottom line is you have that liberty and that freedom to sit or kneel if you'd like. In Hong Kong, no. When they turned their back on the national anthem, what happened was they were visited by the police, arrested, and they made disappear forever. That's a difference between liberty and not liberty. Arguably, China is a communist system, and they're imposing communist rule in Hong Kong. America is a more capitalist system. It's not a true capitalist system, but it's a more capitalist system. My argument would be that free market capitalism builds off this one undeniable truth, that God gave us liberty, individual liberty. Socialists believe we have collectivist liberty, if liberty at all. It's collectivist. In America, if you work and you earn money, you ought to be able to spend the money that you have earned as you see fit. You ought to be able to choose if you work or don't work. And throughout history, the greater the liberty, the greater the prosperity. The less liberty and more control, the more the failure of an economy, like the Soviet Union that collapsed, like communist China that is turning away from their experiment in capitalism and turning back to, and you're watching their growth rates go down. The more control the government's exerting, the less growth that they have. So again, I'll go back to the idea that I started with at the beginning. We have $35 trillion in debt. The only way to get out of that, other than a bankruptcy of our nation, would be to grow out of it. The only way to grow out of it is to have more individual liberty, where people make their own individual choices. And here's something I'll share with you. If I'm working for someone and I'm not allowed to keep the fruits of my labor, of my individual labor, that is a form of economic slavery. Under socialism, your fruits of your labor are taken and pooled, and then whether you worked harder or less hard, you share the same lot as everybody else. Now, that would be a pure socialist system. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. We just spread it out and share it. Under current law, I get to earn and keep what I earn, or at least the non-taxed portion of it, and I get to spend it, and I have that liberty. Under a socialist system, they think of it as, well, look, it's going to be so fair. It's going to be so fair. Everybody's going to get the same thing. But when people realize that, as they did in the Plymouth colony at the start of this nation, or anywhere else socialism has actually been tried, people realize, hey, I don't have to work for this. I get my fair share whether I work or I don't. So therefore, I'm not going to work. And the people that work extra hard give up and say, I'm not going to work extra hard. I'm not getting any benefit out of this. Socialism fails every time because it's unfair. Venezuela failed. It failed in Argentina. And now they're going back to capitalism. And boom, they're watching inflation come down. They're watching the economy improve. Every time you move from socialism to individual liberty, you see prosperity. Every time you move from individual liberty to socialism, you see failure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And isn't it interesting that these proponents of these other, types of governments and types of economies, they're so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it, right? Like they're so hopeful, but the evidence is laid out historically for them already if they just went to take a peek at what's happened with these other nations across time. To your point, it has happened every single time. Socialism has failed every single time. I've actually heard people, I don't know if this is true for you, but I have heard people make the argument to me that, oh, they just did it wrong. America will do it the right way. America will be the first nation to successfully adopt socialism, and we can do it. But it's not just being America, it's being human, isn't it? I mean, people ruin everything. We're still people. We're still human beings. And so that you're always going to have that subsection that is going to figure that out really fast, just like what you just said. Why should I work if someone else is just going to do it for me and I'm getting the same at the end of the day? And it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you try it in America. It doesn't matter if you try it in any other nation. It's a system that seems to be built on an unrealistic expectation of people.
Yeah. No question, but it gives the opportunity for the elites to capture control, and that so there was a term for those people who said, "Oh no, if we try it here in Russia, it's going to work great." Lenin and his cronies called them useful idiots. They're the people that said, no, we're going to steal power. That's our intention. We will be in control. The Politburo will run everything, and we'll get rich. Animal Farm. You just read the book Animal Farm. All animals are equal. Just some animals are more equal than others. When the pigs were in charge, they just stole from everybody. Yeah, they kicked out the corrupt farmer, but as soon as the pigs were in charge, they took control, and that happens every single time. In America, you could not have found a more dedicated and loyal group than those were with the William Bradford and the Plymouth colony, with their perfect intentions of making a great nation, and they tried everybody sharing everything equally, and it failed miserably. These were good, dedicated, hardy, hardworking people that made the, pioneers that made the crossing of the Atlantic Ocean from England, coming here and to start a colony, and it failed because it was socialist. And as soon as they started allowing people to keep the rewards of their own labor, then they saw success. And that's what we're talking about. Should people have the ability to steal from you? Think about what you're paying in taxes now and say, well, what if it's taxed 100%? They took everything that I earned, but then they provided for my food and for my clothing and so forth. That's a third-party pay system. In a third-party pay system, people always lose, and the control people who are making the decisions always win. It is destined for failure from human nature, just like you said, Kyle.
I want to go back for 1 second to something that you mentioned, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer about what we're talking about, but I also am just such a curious person. I like to ask people to predict the future. I like to know what's going to happen. I think most people do. That gives me security. I don't know. And not that this would happen, but I think it might be helpful to know what this could look like. You said a term, bankruptcy of our nation. What would happen if the United States of America went bankrupt? What would that look like?
Well, actually, it's a misnomer in that we have a printing press. And here's a good question people should ask. Why is it that we have debt when the government can print the money?
Right.
Well, the reason is there's a Federal Reserve in between that controls the money supply. But we have a printing press, and so what we'll do, bankruptcy would be, we will just devalue the currency to such a great extent that you'll have these $100 trillion. So we owe $35 trillion. I used to carry these $100 trillion Zimbabwe notes around. I'd take them to Congress and I'd give them to a congressman. I'd say, here, have one of these. And I can't take anything of value. And I'd look at him and I say, you're in luck. It has no value. But if you think it has value, here's $100 trillion, pay off our national debt and send me the change. Of course, they're worthless, because we will be printing money, so prices will just skyrocket. That's what it looks like if we go bankrupt. We technically just enter a hyperinflation. Everybody goes poor. But you could pay off, all the $35 trillion debt because you just print $35 trillion worth of money and pay it off, which means the money's worth less.
Well, and the rate of spending per presidential administration, I mean, the rate that we're at now, Trump added $8 trillion to the debt, but arguably the economy was much stronger even through a national pandemic and lockdown. Biden, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, has already surpassed that, and we're not quite to the end of this term. Should we take the silver bullet and impoverish everyone and try to pay off this $35 trillion? I mean, it's not going to take a long time, the way that we're cranking, to kind of get back to that level of debt again. I mean, it's not sustainable, right? To try to do that.
Totally unsustainable right now, the debt. The answer is you grow the economy and you cause the government to grow at a slower rate than you cause the economy to grow. So you put limits on government spending. All of the programs, all of the debt, the money we're sending overseas to Ukraine or whatever. Now, I want to tell you, it can be done. In 1979 is when I graduated from high school. In 1979, the job market was terrible. The inflation was rampant. Interest rates were off the charts. We were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. The professors that I had in college, entering college, said, oh no, the Soviets are better than us. Their economy's better. They're going to run us over. Russian army's stronger. We had all of these things. They told us we were going into a new ice age. All these terrible things were going on. And we had an election change, and we had an attitude change from Jimmy Carter, who's very, very similar to Joe Biden in policies, to President Ronald Reagan, who was talking about individual liberty and free market capitalism and reducing regulation and all the things that we're unleashing the energy of the United States of America, and all of those things that we can do again. And we entered a boom period, and I thought, graduating high school, there's no way I will ever get a job. It's going to be terrible economy. Everything's going to be awful. And we had a massive boom period because we just changed a few levers and allowed more individual liberty and less government. And by doing that, it solved a lot of those problems. We have that option coming up again. I don't know if President Trump will follow through as President Reagan did, but during his first administration, he did a lot of these things. If he will enact liberty-loving policies, we do have a future. What I'm concerned about is What they'll do next, if we don't solve this economic problem, is they will create central bank digital currency. They'll sell it to you like it's a government-backed Bitcoin, and they'll just create massive amounts of it, and they'll use it as a control mechanism. Remember, the contrast is between individual liberty and control. Control is bad for the economy. Individual liberty is good for the economy. But ultimate control comes if they can control you with your money, which is what we started with. And that is if you're issued money by the U.S. government and it comes electronically and you go spend it and they say, wait, you've already had a cup of coffee today. You don't need any more caffeine. So your money will not be allowed to buy that second cup of coffee at the Starbucks or your local coffee shop. Wait, what? No, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about it openly, that with central bank digital currency, you get it free from the government, you think, and when you go to spend it, they'll say, well, you can buy an electric stove, but not a gas-powered stove. You've driven too many miles, you can't buy any more gasoline. You've drunk a cup of coffee today, you can't have another one today. You're eating too much meat, we want you to eat bugs. You think this sounds like a dystopian, futuristic sci-fi novel, but it is actually what the President of the United States discussed openly in his executive order 14067 on how we can use money to control people. And we'll use it for good things. You can trust us. We'll protect the environment. We'll be good for society. We'll offer good governance. We'll talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which all sounds wonderful until they tell you that you might be too white to make a purchase or to get a job, or you might be too old or too young or to whatever. You should never give the government that much control. We should have liberty, individual liberty at the personal level. But central bank digital currency is designed as their solution, their way out to this dire economic problem that we're facing. And you're going to get that if you vote for the Biden administration. If you vote for the Trump administration, we hope he's going to promote individual liberty. He certainly did in his first term prior to COVID. And we hope that he would continue to promote individual liberty, because if we unleash the American spirit, America didn't become the superpower because we were, smarter people than the rest of the world. How could we be smarter than the rest of the world? We are the rest of the world. We're Indonesians and Vietnamese and Africans and Irish and English and German and Swedish. We are a hodgepodge, a melting pot of people. If we will give them equality of opportunity and equal liberty and opportunity, we will unleash the greatest force known to man, and that force is individual liberty. And if we do that, we will become the robust, strong, powerful America. But if we go down the path of greater control, we will find that we fail as a nation, just like every other nation that's gone into despotism.
Well, it doesn't get a lot clearer than that, and I'll say amen to it. This interview is a roller coaster, okay? So we're going up, it's going to be okay. We need less regulation and more individual liberty, and then we're going down because it's really terrifying to think about that reality. And you're not wrong. They are talking about it a lot. This central bank digital currency really seems like a reality that is not too far off in the future. And we have people who try to use that and scare us and say, you're going to have a chip in your wrist and you go to pay for something and you get denied because, you did something wrong, right? Or like you didn't pay your your water bill. So, you get hauled off and carted out of the supermarket or whatever it's going to be. But those scare tactics are not too far off from what they are talking about. You are not wrong. And I hope that everyone's paying very close attention, because all of the research that I do, and I'm a generalist, right? So I'm looking at politics and policy and culture from every angle, from, digging into every single topic. I really, truly believe that there are a number of people who are going to make this a reality at all costs, to your point, for control mostly. So I hope people are really listening to your words of wisdom here. I want to get to pirate money, because I've wanted to get to pirate money this entire time. You wrote a book about pirate money. And I know everyone's just dying to know what that means and what your book is about.
Well, it ties in perfectly with central bank digital currency because it's the one alternative that we have. Now, I just want to give you a statement, Kyle, that's absolute fact. 250 million people in China are using the digital yuan, which is a central bank digital currency issued by the Bank of China, and people are using it. And you go into Hong Kong, and if you haven't paid your water bill, or if you jaywalked across the street, or if you said that Xi Jinping looks like Winnie the Pooh, which he does, and if you say that, by the way, you'll get censored in China for saying just what I just said. So you're not going to have a lot of viewers in China unless you edit that out because they're going to cut you off. Then you can't use your money. You're not allowed to use it.
Kevin, I saw that they're putting people's faces up on billboards with listing what they did wrong, listing the crime, the financial crime, or the bill they didn't pay, or somebody didn't pay child support, and they're putting them up on these digital billboards. Is that really happening?
It is absolutely happening, and it's used to control you by your money. And I'll give you an example. If you went, there was a bank that was failing in China, and people showed up with their passbooks, and they wanted to get their money out because the bank fails, they lose their money. And they showed up, and the healthcare app on their phones started blinking red because they geolocated them. They knew who they were, where they were, why they were there, and then they ordered them to go home because they were a COVID risk. And that's the level of control you have if you have central bank digital currency. And if you think it won't happen in America, let me just tell you, Mayor Bloomberg in New York 10 years ago said that you can't buy more than 16 ounces of soda. He said that's a law in New York. You go to Subway and want to buy a 32-ounce drink, not allowed to be sold. And he mandated how much soda you could buy. And they pulled that because they didn't have a good way to control it, because you could buy it and then you go to the next store and buy it and go to the next store. And it was deemed unconstitutional. But if it's in your money, it can be done. And the technology already exists. It's in the coding of the money. We've had whistleblowers from the Bank for International Settlements tell us, yes, I've seen the coding, it's there, and they're ready to launch it. So what is the solution? If the federal government says we have $35 trillion in debt, and from now on, instead of you using U.S. dollars, and this, by the way, was a United States dollar from about 100 years ago. It looks very different from the silver certificate dollar, which looks a lot like our dollar today. Bottom line is they change money on us all the time, but the term dollar originally was this. It's a silver coin. It's called a Spanish milled dollar. It's 0.7734 troy ounces of silver. And another Spanish coin that I have is a gold doubloon. This is a gold doubloon. Those were what our founders called real money. So when they used the term dollar in the Constitution, they were referring to a Spanish mill dollar. Now, why did they use that term, dollar? Because they didn't want to use British pound, British farthing, shillings. They didn't want to use any British money. After we'd won our independence, they wanted us to use Spanish money because they felt it was less a threat to our liberty. In fact, here's a Continental note produced in Philadelphia, 1776, and it says on here, $4 note. This bill entitles the bearer to receive 4 Spanish milled dollars or the value thereof in gold or silver, according to a resolution in Congress in Philadelphia, November 2nd, 1776. The term dollar is a Spanish word. It means 0.7734 troy ounces of fine silver. It's what is mentioned in the Constitution as an alternative that states can offer for currency. The United States government, federal government, has the right to coin money. States were forbidden from coining money, and they could only make gold and silver coins legal tender in their state. Gold and silver coin to our founding fathers was a gold doubloon or a silver piece of 8. When you hear gold doubloon and silver piece of 8, which is what a Spanish mill dollar is commonly called, don't you think Captain Jack Sparrow? Don't you think Long John Silver? Don't you think pirates? You think pirates because our founders thought pirate money. Where did we get most of the coins that we used in the United States? A lot of them came in from the pirate ships that they looted, and then they came and spent them in America, and that's where we got the coins, and they said that's real money. So Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution says a state may make nothing other than gold and silver coins legal tender in the state. This is the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, And that means we can make pirate money legal tender. So the state of Utah or California or Texas or New Jersey or Oklahoma or Florida or New Mexico, any individual state, if they want to, can make these coins right here legal tender. Now, not many people carry around coins on their pocket to go pay for their cup of coffee. But what if you added some technology to that? Maybe allowed you to deposit in a depository, and then we gave you a debit card like this one that you could spend, and they would take it out of gold or silver out of your account, and they'd pay the merchant for it when you went to buy your cup of coffee or bought a house or bought a car or whatever, or you could write a check on it. What if we replaced Federal Reserve notes, which are what our currency is? You look at the top of your $20 bill, it says Federal Reserve note, and you deposit that in the bank. What if you deposit these things, gold and silver, in a bank, and they held them for you, and you could spend an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver to buy stuff, or a fraction of an ounce of silver, and they'd keep accounting for it. A state could have its own currency. And what if the state said, we promise to never violate your privacy, we promise never to use this to control you with, and that was written into the state-based legislation? Then the state of Texas, where I live, could all of a sudden give me an opt-out to central bank digital currency. And by the way, gold and silver hold their value over time. So 100 years ago, a gold coin right here, this was 100 years ago, 1924 gold coin. Here's a 1924 $20 bill. Now, if my great-grandfather left me 10 of either one of these, which do you think I'd prefer to have today? 10 ounces of gold worth $24,000 or 10 $20 bills worth $200? Which would you rather have? You want the gold and silver.
I want those gold coins all day. I actually really want anything called a doubloon, Kevin, because I really want to, number one, bury some in my backyard just for kicks, because that sounds like it would be a fun experience. And two, I would absolutely love to pay for something. I mean, aside from everything else, it's just beautiful and really adds to sort of your aesthetic experience of purchasing things. But two, you're talking about economic freedom in this plan to have a state issue this and really commit to its citizens in how it's going to protect its citizens through that kind of currency. And it's really just a beautiful thing.
It is, and it's throughout history in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, it talks about gold and silver as money. Throughout history, the Roman soldiers were paid in silver. In 68 AD, they were paid in denarius that was worth 95% silver. 268 AD, it was 5% silver. They demonetized it, and the economy collapsed, and the Roman Empire failed. Bottom line is if we have gold and silver as money again, it will allow us to do the three things that money is supposed to do. One, money is a unit of account. So when I want to buy something, I know how many dollars it takes to buy it. It's a unit of account. And so I don't have to exchange chickens for sides of beef or for baskets or whatever. I'm in a barter system. I know a unit of account. Number two, it's a means of exchange. And number three, it's a store of value. The problem is that money loses, if it's paper money, it loses its value over time. This $20 bill used to buy an ounce of gold. Today, it won't even buy a fraction of an ounce of gold, which costs $2,400. So we're making gold and silver money again. We're making it transactional, easy to use. It's under the Constitution. It explains how we can preserve, protect, and defend our wealth. It allows us liberty because it won't be turned into central bank digital currency. And all of this I wrote up in an easy to explain, easy to understand, easy to read book called Pirate Money. And that, I do believe, is the economic solution for our day at a personal level and for our nation as a whole.
Yeah, you guys have to read this book. It's brilliant and it's fascinating. And it's just the book that we all need absolutely right now for this time. So make sure you guys are getting Pirate Money. And Kevin, I know that we're winding up on our time here, but for those who haven't gotten to the book yet, tell us what to do. What can we do? Little old me, I'm not a financial person. I don't understand these things, and I'm going to go get your book and I'm going to read it. But as a citizen, as a voter, as one single person, How can we advocate for this? How can we be advocating and working toward this economic freedom, this economic justice, which is a term that you also talk about in your book? Tell us what to do.
Yeah, well, you can get the book at piratemoneybook.com or on Amazon. What you need to do is you need to first get educated. Second thing you need to do is share the information with others. You need to vote your values. Do you believe in individual liberty? What socialism? And stop this debt nonsense. Don't buy things you don't need. Don't pay buy now, pay later. Don't do that. Spend less than you're making. Start saving and investing. Put your money in gold and silver rather than just letting it be in paper money and just devalue over time. Look for good investments. Hire a good financial advisor so that if you're just starting out, you need a financial advisor. So you need to know how much to save and invest. These are very basic blocking and tackling type things. But if you start at a young age and start saving even a small amount of money, you can retire a multimillionaire. And I said that 40 years ago, and now people 40 years ago who did that are retiring multimillionaires. And that American dream can still last. So you've got to practice it at the individual level, and then you've got to share it so that our whole of our nation goes back to individual liberty and turns away from this horrible, despotic socialism.
Mm-hmm. Wise words from the money man. You make it sound so easy. And I think it is easy. But what we hear day in and day out is how dire things are and how much debt we're in. And it's pretty depressing. But you have given us a lot of hope today, Kevin. Thank you so much. Thank you for just sharing your expertise, your brilliance, your wisdom. Make sure you guys go get Pirate Money as soon as you can. It's just an outstanding book, and I hope everybody gets the chance to read it. So, Kevin, thank you so much for being with me today, for breaking all of this down for my audience. And I hope to have you again come back on the program in the future and share more, because there is so much more to this. We just scratched the surface today, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Politically Basic, where we break down the basics of all political issues and let you decide. Be sure to follow us at politicallybasic.com and at politicallybasic on all socials so you don't miss a single episode. See you next time.